What do you think the chances are that Putin ever tries to deploy any nukes, whether it be like a tactical nuke or a small nuke?
Zero. There's not a lot of. So I shouldn't say zero. So here's my thing. So nuclear weapons aren't that useful, and I say that because. Especially we're talking about tactical weapons, which is something that when you had Annie on here, like she didn't really, Annie Jacobson, she didn't really get into the difference between tactical and strategic weapons. I think probably because she doesn't believe that there really is, but there is.
Right. Well, she talks about in the book. She explains that there's this guy. One of the guys she based her book off, Billy Waugh, who is a CIA mercenary who he did a bunch of tests where they simulated deploying a tactical suitcase nuke.
Suitcase bomb. Well, it's really the size of like a beer keg. You should call it a beer keg bomb. Okay. Yeah, it's. If you actually look that up, it looks like.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's like a beer keg. It's not a suitcase. It's a beer keg. Yeah, you can look that up.
Yeah, find that.
The suitcase bomb, but it's a beer keg. It's really freaking big. Engineers actually had those to like destroy infrastructure. So back in the 1950s, 1960s. Yeah.
Oh shit, you're right.
That's a beer keg.
Holy cow. It's
not a suitcase. It's a beer keg.
No, not even close.
So back in the 1950s, 1960s, we used gravity bombs, regular bombs dropped that were nuclear from planes like the Thunder Chief, the F-104. And the idea was that, like, all right, if the Russians are coming close to a bridge in West Germany, we need to knock that bridge down. We're going to use a nuclear weapon on that bridge. Why? Because you don't have to be that surgical. If you look at the Than Hoa Bridge in Vietnam, it took the U.S., I want to say 7 years to destroy that bridge, the Than Hoa Bridge. 7 years to destroy that thing until it was finally destroyed. Like they finally dropped a span with the I did a whole video on this. Yeah, they finally dropped that span with a laser guided bomb in 1972.
Wow.
1965 to 1972. That's how long it took them. And we had hundreds of sorties against this bridge. All right. Nowadays,
Steve, can you turn that fan off?
Nowadays we have laser guided weapons, GPS guided weapons.
Thank you.
It's a lot easier for us to destroy infrastructure. But back in the 1950s, 1960s, it made sense to use a nuclear weapon against something. Now, if you want to talk about today, there's basically two valid cases or two understandable cases in which you'd use a tactical nuclear weapon. You'd use a tactical nuclear weapon to stop an advance. Let's say the Ukrainian army's broken through your defenses. They are headed to the Black Sea or the Sea of Azov in order to link up or in order to cut you in half. It would make... Now, I'm going to invoke a special rule here. I call it the very bad things rule. Have you ever watched the movie Very Bad Things? There was so the movie Very Bad Things was about a guy's at a bachelor party and the exotic dancer they invite to their hotel room accidentally gets killed.
Oh, no.
While they're partying with her. And Christian Slater has the greatest line I've ever heard in a movie where he goes, if you take away all of your morals and all of your values, what we have is a 105-pound problem that needs to be moved from point A to point B. So they move this exotic dancer, and then they suffer the consequences of regret, for the rest of their lives, right? But Christian Slater wasn't wrong, right? He wasn't wrong. So if you get in the mind of Christian Slater from Very Bad Things, you can go, a nuclear weapon is a perfectly valid tool to use on a unit that is breaking through your lines because it'll stop it like that. It'll stop that advance. So if, let's say, the Ukrainians break through and Russian forces just start collapsing and collapsing and collapsing, they will probably use a nuclear weapon. They could use a nuclear weapon, a gravity bomb, most likely delivered by a Su-34 bomber, on the advancing lines. It'll stop the attack like that. They do that, they might risk a conflict with NATO. But it is a valid use for that weapon. So that's one use case for that weapon. Second use case would be to destroy an underground bunker that you just can't reach with a conventional weapon. So the Iranians are building, they have their uranium enrichment facility.
A bunker buster.
Bunker buster, yeah. So you put that thing down. Yeah, that would be another valid use. But for the most part, you're restricted to, their third valid use against shipping. A nuclear weapon, you put a nuclear weapon in a hypersonic missile, you launch that against an aircraft carrier, you've got yourself a carrier killer. So that would be a useful use case. So 3 use cases, and that's pretty much it. Everything else, so I don't really see, Ukraine doesn't have any aircraft carriers. Now, you could use a nuclear weapon and detonate that and then run people through the debris field, run people through the blast. So you use a nuclear weapon to open up a hole in the lines and then run people through that crater, released on the periphery of that crater. You attack through the crater or the affected area. So you don't even have to detonate it on the surface. You detonate it in an airburst.
In the atmosphere,
There's less fallout, right?
EMP effects.
There'll be some, right? But you detonate that, you push everybody through that hole. There's not a lot of radioactivity because it was airburst. That was another thing Annie didn't talk about, the difference between airburst and surface burst, but that's fine. But you run everybody through that hole, and now you can break through. And now you can, get into Ukraine's rear. But does President Putin have the troops and the supplies to actually exploit a breakthrough? Because not only do you have to exploit that breakthrough, then you have to support that breakthrough. Now you need to get them petroleum, lubricants, food, fuel, water, all of that stuff through that breakthrough. Do you have the forces to exploit that? That's the question. And I don't think they do. Right? Because again, they can't build up any forces, because as soon as you start building up anything greater than a company, what happens? You get hit with rockets. That's actually the dangerous part of us not giving aid to Ukraine. They're never going to run out of rockets, but it's going to get to the point where they're going to have to be more surgical or more judicious on when they use them. And that's kind of scary, because then if that happens, now they're at a point where it's like, crap, when do we can use this rocket on this forest building up here, or we can use this rocket on this forest building up here. That is a dilemma. And I've always said, you want to create dilemmas, not problems for your adversary.
What do you know about our nuclear interceptor system? The U.S. has this thing called the Interceptor system, where we have, I think, 44.
Yeah, we have 4 at Vandenberg, and then we have 40 in Alaska.
Right, that are designed to basically intercept nuclear warheads out of the sky, right? And it's essentially an analogy for that is like shooting a bullet out of the sky with another bullet.
Yeah, we have...
How effective do you think that is?
I mean, so supposedly with all the tests they've done, it's about 50% effective, right? But if you're dealing with...
Each rocket's about 50% effective,
That we know of, right? Because they've done limited amounts of tests.
Right.
We don't have a lot of these things. Now, we have a couple of arrows in our quiver. We can shoot ballistic missiles down today. We've been able to do it for years. We've been able to do it since the 90s. So have you heard of the Aegis system?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Aegis system, it's on every U.S. destroyer and cruiser. The Aegis system, it is a robotic killer.
What does it stand for?
I actually don't remember. What Aegis... I don't think Aegis is an acronym.
Just go to...
I think Aegis is...
No, Aegis system, and then click on all.
I actually think that Aegis is just the name of the system. I don't think it actually stands for anything.
It's not an acronym? Okay.
Yeah, I don't think... it's just the name for the shield.
Integrated Naval Weapons System, which uses computers and radars to track and guide weapons and destroy enemy targets. It was developed by the Missile and Surface Radar Division of the RCA and is now produced by Lockheed. Okay.
Yeah. So this thing is able to intercept ballistic missiles. I think it was the SM-3 or SM-6. When it comes to naval topics, there's a reason I call the Navy the Department of the Boat People. Like, all right, I get a little... It's talking about naval stuff. Okay. But there is a missile that can take out ballistic missiles. When we've been able to do that, we did that with the Scud. I don't know if you remember the first Gulf War, the Scud missile. In the first Gulf War, Saddam Hussein was firing Scud missiles at Saudi Arabia. And the Scud is I guess, short-range, medium-range ballistic missile. And we were maybe or maybe not shooting those down with Patriots. It was kind of a weird thing. So our Patriots are our interceptors. And back then, the Patriot, the PAC-1, or the Block 1 version of the weapon, was a proximity warhead, which would blow up when it got close to the target. So this thing gets close, it blows up. But the problem is that it blows up in a cone. And so as the missile's coming in, the cone is still expanding. And so a lot of times the cone was kind of missing the missile, was blowing up behind the missile. So that's why we developed different versions of the Patriot that would actually do hit to kill or kinetic, a kinetic kill, the PAC-3 GEM version of the missile. But so we can kill missiles with the Patriot. We can kill ballistic missiles with the Patriot. We can kill ballistic missiles with THAAD, which is
what is THAAD?
THAAD is it's another kind of interceptor, theater area, THAAD, defense. I'll have to look that up, the actual name of THAAD. We don't have a lot of THAAD batteries. But THAAD system, THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense.
There you go.
Yeah, THAAD. So think of it like, if the Patriots started lifting weights, right? That's a THAAD.
Okay.
Right? So we have that system. Now, those systems aren't deployed. There might actually be a THAAD system protecting DC. We actually don't know. There might be THAAD or NASAMS. There's been rumors. Again, you go on dates in the Beltway, like, oh yeah, we have a THAAD system protecting. It's in West Virginia. Like, really? That's always a weird thing because, like, when some girl tells you about that, either they're telling you a secret that you're not authorized to know, or they're full of it. And both of those situations are bad.
Yeah.
Both
I don't think I've ever been on a date where a girl's been bragging about THAAD missiles.
Any kind of missiles. You got to live in DC, right?
That's a DC
you live
thing,
in DC.
Yep.
It's like
100%.
I know this thing. I know this guy, right?
Yeah.
So
the hierarchy climb.
Yeah, we can shoot down. We did a shoot down of ballistic missiles in I think it was January of 2001, or it was maybe 2002. It was in the UAE. The Houthis launched 3 ballistic missiles at a base in the UAE, in the United Arab Emirates. And I actually have a video that I collaborated with several Patriot guys on, and I actually show what the ECS looked like. I show the actual engagement that happened on screen using like this simulator, where we actually show what's going on. And I gotta tell you, people said that I had one person say that video is better than the Hurt Locker. It was like more exciting than the Hurt Locker. Thank you, I appreciate that. And I like to make air defense exciting.
Yeah, I guess the scary thing about our interceptor system is that, I mean, like, the worst fear is that some unhinged dictator like Kim Jong-un is going to send a rocket, right? Send an ICBM towards us. And if they did that, we have the what's it called? I think it's called launch on warning system, which basically means the second our cyber system or our satellites detect a ballistic missile heading towards us, we have to empty our ICBM arsenals, right? All of our missiles that are in silos in the Northwest. You're rolling your eyes.
You're really making me go there, aren't you? Because I wasn't gonna come on here and make fun of Annie.
Come on, let's do it. We gotta challenge this stuff. So for people at home who haven't read the book, essentially, did you read it?
I read it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
I read it after watching your video, and I'm listening to it.
So let me sort of articulate what she explains in the scenario. So, in the event that Kim Jong-un launches a nuke, ICBM, towards the U.S., we see it on our radars, and we have 6 minutes to launch our ICBMs, because we have to assume that the second someone launches the first missile, they're going to, well, first of all, the idea is no one sends one nuke. They send the mother load if they're going to incite a nuclear war. But the first missiles are going to strike our nuclear missile sites that cannot be moved, the ones that aren't on planes and the ones that aren't on submarines. So our most vulnerable nukes are the ones that are land-based in, like, I think it's Montana and the Northwest. So our launch on warning system that we have in place is that once we see the missiles up, we have to empty those silos, right? And we have to go strike back at them. So now the problem is, if we launch over the North Pole, then we have to fly, those missiles have to fly over Russia before they hit North Korea. When's the last time we were able to get Russia on the phone or Putin on the phone in 6 minutes? I don't think it's ever happened. I think the last time that we tried to get Putin on the phone, it took like more than 48 hours before we can get a response. So, but Russia, their generals are going to see that we now have nukes flying towards Russia.
Yeah.
But there's very little, if not zero, chance that we're going to be able to get on the phone with them to let them know, look, these nukes aren't coming for you guys. They're going for North Korea. So they're going to see those coming from the U.S. They're going to do the same thing. They're going to launch theirs.
So that is an opinion a person can have. So Roger Ebert used to have this thing, he called it the idiot plot, which is the only way that a movie can work is if everyone's an idiot. Right? Mm-hmm. And in that particular book, in that particular scenario, that was a very unique scenario. Mm-hmm. So in this particular thing, North Korea launches a nuclear weapon. And the United States decides to fire their arsenal, but because those weapons have to go over Russia and we can't get Russia on the phone, Russia counterstrikes. Mm-hmm. Now, I think probably what would have really happened is we would have just let it come.
Really?
Let it take out the Pentagon. We can get a new Pentagon. Whatever, right? So what if there's not a nuclear weapon on it? There's no way of knowing. Is that a nuclear weapon? Is it a decoy? Will that weapon actually explode? I actually question whether Russia's arsenal, whether their nuclear arsenal has enough tritium in it to actually work. Tritium decays. It's a radioactive isotope that's used to actually boost the nuclear fusion process.
This is a big debate to have in 6 minutes.
It is, but here's the deal. One nuclear weapon is headed toward the U.S. We have time. We have our submarines. We have our bombers. We have all of our missile fields. We see one weapon. We don't see an entire 2,000 weapons coming out. So we see one weapon. Mm-hmm. All right. One weapon could be a MIRV, multiple independently targetable reentry vehicle. Mm-hmm. Could be a MIRV, right? Could be multiple weapons on it. But even one missile isn't going to take out multiple silos, right? Mm-hmm. So we're still going to have our counter. So another thing. In nuclear warfare, you have counterforce and countervalue. All right, counterforce is you're attacking the enemy's ability to launch nuclear weapons. Countervalue, you're attacking economic targets, the ability of the enemy to wage war. Mm-hmm. All right, attacking Washington, D.C., I guess you'd call that a countervalue target, right? Not necessarily a counterforce, a counterforce target because you want to cut off the head of the snake, right? You want to cut off the command control capabilities. So let it hit Washington. Screw it. Maybe it's a dud. Maybe it won't explode. Maybe it's a chemical weapon. You lose Washington. You know what happens? Nothing. So you got to get a new Congress. That's easy. Trivial. We can do that. Right? But you launch that nuclear weapon and it takes out Washington, D.C. We still have 1,500, 1,800 ICBMs. Well, we have 400 or so ICBMs in Minuteman ICBMs. We have a bunch on submarines, and then we have some gravity bombs and cruise missiles, the AGM-86s that can be launched from B-52s, and gravity bombs that can be fired from the B-2.
Do you think we have them on satellites?
No.
No?
I mean, I don't know, but for what? There's no purpose. There's no reason for that. You know, we know about every satellite we ever launched.
But we worry about other countries having them on satellites.
So what does that actually give you?
Only thieves think people are stealing from them.
I mean, I don't really see how that gives us any kind of an advantage, having a weapon in a satellite. I mean, we have enough to boost stuff into orbit and explode them if you want to do an EMP attack. But right. So yeah, I mean, so there's that. So let it explode. Screw it. Let it explode. And then after that, we can look at our options. So that's number one. Part of the plot point of that book was that Russia sees us attacking. Russia has the capability of detecting a launch from North Korea.
Say that again?
Russia has the capability of detecting a launch from North Korea.
Okay.
Their systems might not be as good as Cyber's, but they'll definitely go, whoa, something just blew up in Washington. We don't know what that was. Let's get America on the phone.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like a major, again, it's the idiot plot. Roger Ebert's idiot plot. In order for this to work, everybody has to be an idiot. Mm-hmm. Right? So we kind of traipse toward nuclear war, in that particular book. Mm-hmm. And I don't really foresee and if we had done that, if they really did explode a nuclear weapon over Washington, you would have the 2nd ID, 2nd Infantry Division, and every single ROK soldier and Marine in Republic of Korea ready to go north and jack these guys up. We wouldn't even have to use a nuclear weapon. North Korea would probably collapse in about 3 days if we offered them food. right? It's such
What do you think about the part in the book where she says that there have been like hundreds and hundreds of war game scenario or simulations that they've run, and every single time this exact thing happens?
Well, just because you ran the simulation doesn't mean it's actually how it's going to work out. I mean, I can tell you, if I were the president, and I noticed. If I were the president, right? Like if I were the president,
Ryan
have
McBeth
National
for president.
Whiskey Day, right?
I think you'd be a good president. You would at least be good for morale.
Oh my God, I would be the first bachelor president since Chester A. Arthur. Right? Can you imagine? It's tough enough for me trying to date women now. Can you imagine what that's like if I'm president? So what do? Well, I'm the president. So you see this can of White Rabbit. So imagine, imagine for those of you who are watching or listening, imagine a can of White Rabbit, just a can of soda or a can of energy drink. Now, on top of that can of White Rabbit, imagine a turret. All right. Now, that turret is moving around the center ring of that can. Mm-hmm. Now, in a lot of Russian tanks, the ammunition is stored in a carousel around the can lid. So they do that because a lot of Russian tanks have autoloaders. Now,
Steven, maybe you can find some diagrams on the internet of this.
Bit of history about this. Mm-hmm. The Russians always thought that they were going to fight in a nuclear, biological, and chemical environment. So that means
since like the Cold War.
Since the Cold War.
Okay.
They assumed that they would always be fighting in a nuclear, biological, and chemical environment. So when they decided to build some of these new tanks, the T-62, T-64, T-72, T-80. These tanks were built with an autoloader instead of a human loader, and there's two reasons why. Mm-hmm. The first is that if you leave out a human loader, then you can make the tank smaller.
Okay.
Because you don't have a person standing up loading shells into the gun, right? And the second reason is that if you're fighting in a nuclear environment, every time the loader opens that breech door, they're going to get the shine from the radiation coming in. So they're going to get juiced up, or at least their right arm is going to get juiced up.
Right.
So
when it's exposed from the tank.
Exposed from opening that tank barrel, and there's radioactivity.
I think that's a good one. The T90 autoloaders. That's nope, not that one. There was a orange one. Yeah, 4K 3D animation.
Yeah, some
the
of
left,
those
to the
are.
left. Nope. The orange.
Thing.
There you go.
Yeah.
So this carousel
Turn
loader.
the audio off.
This particular carousel loader is fully automated. The shell gets pushed in, and then the actual the charge gets pushed in after it. So they split it up into two sections. There's the loading tray coming up, and then the next thing you're going to see is the shell is going to get pushed into the breech.
And this is all happening inside the tank.
This is all happening inside the tank. It's fully automated. It's taken a little while.
Yeah.
So this guy's manually putting the shell in for some reason, but all right, that goes in.
Russians.
And then and now they're manually putting the propellant bag in. So
that's
this
like a
probably
giant
wasn't the best
shotgun
video.
shell.
It is. Oh yeah. And well, that is
Oh, dude.
So in this case, the autoloader must be broken, but typically that stuff comes up from the bottom of the tank.
Okay.
And it's in this carousel that surrounds the entire vehicle, and so when that vehicle gets hit, the tank pops off. Now, the tank, the top of the turret explodes into the air. Usually, well, sometimes.
And this was happening in Ukraine
Constantly.
because the Russians had their tanks built like this.
Yeah, but look, every tank is a trade-off, right? So the Russians,
this is much better.
Yeah, they use an autoloader. Americans use a 19-year-old with a strong arm. So what does that mean? Well, it means there's another person that has to crew the tank. It means there's another person you have to feed.
Yeah.
It means that you can have fewer tanks, right? Like if you think about it, for every 3 tanks, since there's 3 crew in every tank, a driver, a gunner, and a tank commander, there's 3 crew in every Russian tank, and there's 4 crew in every American tank, the Russians can have an extra tank for the same amount of crew that the Americans have. And that has its own power right there, right?
Right.
So, you're dealing with.
And I'm sure them being smaller is better, right? They weigh less. I'm sure they're a little bit harder to hit. Maybe
if it's a main gun round, it's going to be a little bit. So the actual size of something like the T-72, which is probably Russia's, it's not the most widely produced tank, probably the most used tank in Russia. If you take something like the T-72, it's about 2/3 the size of the U.S. Abrams. So that was a lot harder to hit back in the days when it was gun on gun. Well, nowadays we have kamikaze missiles. We have weapons like the Javelin, which take a look at the heat source that you've identified, and it locks it into its little computer brain, and then it goes after that tank. It doesn't care how small you are. Right? So nowadays, that isn't as big of an advantage as it was. And that's a huge issue for Russia.
What other sort of weapon technicality failures has Russia had during this war? Or what other, like, what's another, like, pain point for them, I guess?
Logistics was a huge pain point.
Yeah.
Logistics. When you first started the conversation, you asked me, like, why does Russia do this, or why were they so bad at what they did?
Yeah.
It's because it always worked before.
Yeah.
Russia has always been able to kind of blunder their way into victory, whether they trained their troops that well or not, just because they can just keep throwing bodies at it and artillery until the problem solves itself. But like South Ossetia, which is a war with Georgia, I mean, they blundered their way around South Ossetia for quite a few weeks and still managed to win. Chechnya, the Battle of Grozny, that was an absolute catastrophe, but Russia came back and they just leveled every single building as on their way in. So it always seemed to work before. Right? Now, logistics in this particular war have been absolutely horrible. Russia just can't seem to get the supplies they need to the front lines. And another big issue is they don't use truck trailers.
Truck trailers?
Truck trailers. Oh, I could talk about truck trailers all day.
What kind of truck trailers are we talking about?
So, for their military, in truck trailer, like the kind of trailer that
like
might go on, like a flatbed trailer or an additional trailer that can go on a military truck. Okay. So if you look at an American truck like an LMTV, light medium tactical vehicle, right, or FM, family medium tactical vehicle, family medium tactical vehicles. If you put a trailer on a truck, you double the carrying capacity of the truck, and you only suffer an 8 to 10% fuel cost.
Right.
Well, in Russia, it takes too long to train people how to back up a truck trailer, because backing up a trailer is a skill.
Yes.
That is a skill, and it takes practice.
Yep.
Well, they don't have time.
Do it a lot here in Florida with boats.
They don't have, you can imagine, right? So they don't have time to teach people that skill. So they just don't use trailers. So essentially, whenever you see a truck and it's not carrying a trailer, that's half of that truck movement that's just been wasted, right? So that's another big problem, is that Russia just doesn't use truck trailers because they don't have the trained people to operate them.
Right.
So that's the second thing that they're doing wrong. But they're at the point now where they're doing more things right than wrong. And that's a very dangerous situation. Oh, yeah. Well, they figured out how to do on-call artillery. That was something they did not have at the beginning of the war, using like their Orlan 10 drones, spotter drones, to call in artillery and loitering munitions. So they'll take like an Orlan 10 and they'll launch that and they'll loiter above the battlefield and they'll go, okay, there's a Ukrainian position there. Send up three loitering munitions, right? So they send up 3 Lancets. Like, all right, yeah, we got one tank there, okay, send all these 3 toward these targets right here. It's at the point right now in Ukraine where I don't think they can. Russia and Ukraine, both Russia and Ukraine, they can't put anything greater than a company in one place. And a company is about 110 soldiers or maybe 30 some vehicles. It depends on the organization, but they can't really mass any force. Neither side can mass force because we have such good ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. We have such good ISR that that whenever you build up people for an attack, the other side can see it, and they can send loitering munitions or drones to go take out those targets, or artillery, or rockets like HIMARS. So I would find it very difficult. I think it'd be very difficult for Russia or Ukraine to break through their trenches unless there's a major game-changing weapon, because they just don't have. You just can't mass any forces because the enemy can see it, and they can send loitering munitions and rockets right toward that area. Well, I don't believe in the military-industrial complex, but
what do you mean you don't believe in it?
All right. So do you know how much money how much money Lockheed Martin made in 2023?
I have no clue, but if I was to guess,
what is the name of your fact checker?
Steve.
I don't know if Steve
with a PH.
Steve with a PH. So Steve with a PH can probably look this up real quick. But I'm going to do this from memory. So Lockheed Martin made $8.7 billion last year. Am I right?
That's it? I thought it would be more than that.
Lockheed Martin, I think it was $8.7 billion for their total profit, their earnings.
Click.
Now,
you can just Google it. You don't have to go to images. I'm sure it's just right on Google. Oh, no, you just had it.
That's okay.
There you go. $67.6 billion in 2023. Net sales compared to 66
net earnings were 6.9 billion. So that's what you got to concentrate on. Net earnings.
What's the difference between earnings and sales?
Well, I mean, the earnings are what you're bringing in after your sales, right?
So net earnings, I guess that's saying that's profit.
Yeah, that's your profit.
Okay.
So 6.9 billion in profit. I was wrong. So I think it was 8.7, 6.9 billion. Now take a wild guess what Apple brought in.
A wild guess what Apple
97 billion. I want to say it's 97 billion in profit. So 2003 Apple revenue should be around 97 billion.
Simple.
It's okay. So yeah, Apple
383 billion. 97 in net
97
income.
Billion.
Right.
So now, I want you to imagine that you're a congressman. And there's two guys sitting in your lobby, okay? And one guy is from Apple. They both got briefcases full of money. One guy's from Apple, one guy's from Lockheed Martin. Mm-hmm. Who are you asking into your office first?
Apple.
Yeah, there's no military-industrial complex. I bet if you look up Pfizer, I don't know what the numbers are for Pfizer or for pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, but what about who's the Mike Turner, I believe, the guy who is the Ohio congressman.
Mm-hmm.
He was the guy. There was all these. I don't know if you heard about the recent UAP hearings that were happening, and they were trying to disclose. There was a bill, and in there was this disclosure bill or whatever, where I think it was Battelle Memorial Institute and Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and a bunch of the aerospace corporations that were based in Ohio were supposed to divulge all this secret information and divulge all their classified documents. And this guy was the only guy who was stopping that bill from going through, and he was the representative of that district where those companies were based. And obviously there was those companies were lobbying for it. And I mean, you can't deny that there's a ton of influence with these military contractors in the United States, right?
So one thing that they do bring to the table is they do bring high-tech jobs. I think it's about 2 million Americans work in aerospace, roughly. So roughly about 2 million. But how many realtors are there? How many nurses are there? How many teachers are there?
Right.
So, look, maybe back in the 50s or so, I think Eisenhower gave his military-industrial complex speech. I think it was in 1961 where he gave that speech, where he warned about the military-industrial complex. Now, maybe back then when you had multiple defense contractors, now I think you basically have 5.
Okay, well, there's one Apple. Can you look up total revenue for What are the big five? It's
Lockheed,
Boeing,
Raytheon,
Northrop Grumman,
McDonnell Douglas.
Is it like a name? Big Five?
Just
top five defense contractors. You could probably say
top five defense contractors. Revenue for 2023. So Lockheed Martin was 63. And now we're looking at. I'm sure this is like gross, right?
Yeah.
Revenue. Gross revenue 63 million. RTX was 39 billion. Northrop Grumman was 32 billion. Show more rows.
And if you look at our budget, so I believe our budget is roughly. Oh God!
Go. You're going too fast. There you go. 30 billion for Boeing. General Dynamics 30 billion. So if you add these up, they're going to be. I mean, we spread them out. We don't just do one contractor.
It depends on what you're buying. Like, find me a radio that isn't from L3 Harris. That's that they manufacture essentially all the radios.
Right. And what about the those new nuclear submarines that they're doing? Well, they're the Columbia class.
Columbia
submarine.
class.
Yeah. Google that. The new Columbia class nuclear submarines price, and who is producing those. $9 billion per unit. The planned Columbia-class submarine is drawn in 2019 by Naval Sea Systems Command. Cost is $109.8 billion for 12 boats, projected in 2021, and $9.15 billion per unit. And they're building them now.
Oh, here we go.
They're also going to last for about 30, 40 years.
So they replaced the Ohio-class nuclear submarines.
Yeah.
But that's crazy money. Yeah. And why do we need more of these nuclear submarines?
I'll tell you why. Because for every nuclear submarine you see, there's two you don't see.
Right.
Because for every nuclear submarine that's out at sea, one is going through training and one is going through refit at depot. So you don't need one nuclear submarine, you need three. Right. If there's an accident or something like that, then you need to shuffle things around.
Right.
So whenever you see a nuclear submarine, you always have to think in threes. Really, that's the case for almost any piece of military equipment, or at least any ship. We have, I think we have 11 aircraft carriers right now, and 3 are on patrol. There's the Eisenhower in the Gerald R. Ford in the Mediterranean, I believe. There's the Eisenhower in the Red Sea, and the Ronald Reagan is in Japan right now. Yeah.
Wow.
I believe. Yeah. And there's a couple of amphibious landing ships that are also around.
Yeah. It's interesting to me how, in the media, if you just pay attention to the headlines, the daily headlines of the people that are the most outspoken against these wars, right? Like the Russia-Ukraine war, or even if it's funding the Israel-Hamas war, they're not talking about like those submarines that we're spending $10 billion a piece on.
Yeah. How many are we buying? I don't know how many Columbia class. I don't know how many of the boomers, the Ohio class boomers we have, but it's probably around 12, maybe 20. I think maybe we have 20. So
you think we only have 20?
I think it's around that number, probably 20.
How
21.
many Ohio class nuclear subs does the U.S. have?
So
I saw this in Annie's new book, that nuclear war book. She has this incredible map. I think I sent it to you before, Stephen. We've talked about it on the podcast a few times. It's a map. 18
Ohio class
submarines that contain 14 ballistic missiles per submarine.
4 of them were taken out of service to, I think they were replaced with cruise missiles, conventional cruise missiles, as basically arsenal ships, right? So we can fire conventional cruise missiles at bad guys.
Oh, really? Well, those subs have those MIRV rockets on them, right?
Yeah,
the multiple reentry vehicles. Yeah. Where so each rocket, I think each missile has 3 warheads on each one, I think it is.
I can't remember whether it's 3 or 10, but that's easy enough. They're called Trident missiles.
Right. That's just like mind-bending technology.
We've had that technology since the 60s.
We can launch this thing, and then it computer tells each little warhead what target to hit. That's just wild to me.
Yeah, and actually, the funny thing, I don't know if you've ever heard of the U-2 spy plane.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So we actually didn't really realize the Earth was kind of egg-shaped until we sent U-2s up.
Really?
And, the information was like, wow, that's kind of weird.
It's wider at the
the
equators.
telemetry for our missiles back in the 60s was wrong. Back in the 50s and 60s was wrong. We were going to miss cities by miles.
Oh, really?
Because we were dealing with a spherical Earth
Yeah.
instead of a kind of an egg-shaped Earth. So it was the U-2 that figured out, wait a minute, the Earth isn't exactly what we thought it was.
Wow.
U-2 is a fascinating plane,
The U-2 is a fascinating plane.
and
We
it's
spent
still
a
in
lot.
service. They still got that thing flying.
What about the SR-71? Is it the Blackbird SR-71?
Yeah.
That's why they created Area 51. Was to develop those.
I buy that.
Those planes back in the day, and I think no, that was the U-2. So it was first, I think the U-2 was why they actually created Area 51 to develop that U-2, and then the SR-71 came after that.
Now, have you heard of the Glomar Explorer?
Remind me of
Oh,
that?
all right. So there was the book. I think it was called the Taking of K-19. Now, back in the early 1960s, I believe, this Russian ballistic missile submarine was out in the Pacific, and there was a failure. It was the K-19. You can Glomar Explorer is fine too.
Glomar Explorer.
Yeah. So this is like a spy novel, but it's real. So
Oh yes, I have heard of this. Yeah, we just
Yeah.
talked about this on a podcast. Yeah.
yeah, this
The Russian submarine?
Russian submarine
Yeah.
went down, and they're like, we think we know where it is, and so the government went to Howard Hughes and said, will you come up with a fake ship that you're going to mine for manganese nodes, which is something crazy that Howard Hughes would do, right?
Right.
And Howard Hughes said, yes, I'll help you out. They built this ship. They went, got the submarine. They picked it up off the ocean floor. It broke in half. We got a little bit of it, but we got some code books and we learned some Russian nuclear secrets. And it's probably one of the best kept secrets of the Cold War.
What do you make of the fact of what happened on October 7th? Like, how do you think they were able to plan that attack and execute that attack? I mean, I've never been to Israel, but from everyone that I've talked to that's been there, they said you can't sneeze on that border without an IDF soldier in your face.
Well, they probably did it by keeping everybody segregated. And I think one of the reasons, by segregated, I mean like they had multiple multiple operating cells, like squads, like 9 to 13 dudes. Now, the reason I believe this is that every single dude that was captured by the IDF who was involved in the raid said that they were promised an apartment and $10,000. Now, here's why I think this was compartmentalized. I believe that they had, I think it was around 2,000, 3,000 troops, all of whom thought they were independent cells. Because if they didn't think that, they would have talked to each other and been like, hey, did they promise you an apartment? Oh, yeah, they promised me an apartment. How about you? Yeah, they promised me an apartment. Hold up, they promised all of us an apartment? Where are they going to get all these apartments from? Right? So I think that's an indicator that now Hamas lied, or maybe they actually did think that they were going to be able to give those who survived and brought back a prisoner an apartment. If there was this coin operation that Israel conducted for the next 5 years, that might have happened. Right. But instead, they got a sledgehammer to the face. Right. So all these dudes were motivated. I'm going to go. I'm going to capture prisoners. I'm going to bring them back because then I get an apartment. And they never talked outside their cell because they were told not to. So I think what we had, I believe it was, I want to say it was more than 13. I want to say it was probably around 30 cells that breached the border fence in Israel. And started running amok. So 30 cells, 100, 10 guys each. It was around
How many of them were there total?
I want to say it was between 300. So it's a tough one, right? Because one of the things that people did was that some dudes noticed the hole open in the fence and they just ran through and are grabbing like air conditioners, tires. Because these are all things they can't necessarily get, right? Because of the embargo. So you're a Palestinian dude, and your wife is like, "It's hot." Well, fence is open.
Yeah,
honey. I'm going to Sears. Right? I'll be right back. So, what are you going to do, right? So actually, I don't recall the exact number of people, between 300 and 3,000, right? So it depends on what you count as a guy, as a
and how does the Mossad? I mean, how does the Mossad miss this with all the communications that they can intercept and all the intelligence they have? I mean, they're able to. I had John Kiriakou on here a couple times, and he tells me about how they were able to figure out how the Hamas and some of these guys that were inside of Gaza, they were literally communicating to each other on
backgammon.
Game apps.
Yeah,
like the chat feature on the game apps, which is insane.
Yeah, a little while back, I know there were people online who were saying, Ryan, talk to us about this ban on, or the government wanted to be able to look at game app stuff without a warrant. Well, that's why. Right. Because it was from
and
stuff
that's
like
how the San Bernardino shooter was communicating as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So I think a lot of it was just face-to-face contact. They're doing this in small cells. And the other thing is that, like, it's just such a Tom Clancy kind of thing to believe. Like, oh, they're not going to do that. Like, that's a Tom Clancy movie, right? 3,000 people stream over the border, raid, grab people, bring them back. That's like a Clancy novel. And Israel might have believed that, like, all right, a couple of cells might come across the border, and that might have been why they kept it down to the individual cells as well. I don't think any of these cells knew what other cells were doing. Now, maybe battalion commanders knew or company commanders knew, but I think at the individual level, individual squad level, they thought they were the only ones, right? So they go over. So if Israel did intercept stuff, they're like, oh, it's just another freaking squad doing their stupid BS stuff. Maybe it'll come over the border. We'll get them when they do. Don't worry about it. Yeah, Basad. There's a time I pronounce it wrong again. Like Israelis go, like, you're pronouncing it wrong. Well, I speak Arabic. Sorry, guys. But there's a saying in Israel. Yeah, Basad. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine. A couple of guys. Yeah, Basad. We'll take care of it. Don't worry. Right. So it could have been that. And now, when you're seeing dudes like with hang gliders. Like this powered, what are they called, ultralights? Like, wow, they have an ultralight club now? It's a heck of a club for an open air prison to have. How come they have ultralights? Like, that's kind of that probably would, in the intelligence community, this is what we call a clue, right? Like, why is there suddenly an ultralight club popping up in Gaza? Maybe I would have investigated that a little bit. But one of the ways they hit the border, some came through tunnels, some came through the fence, some came through ultralights, some came by the ocean. Right. They came in on boats, small boats. So the ultralight thing, that still blows me away.
Yeah, that is pretty insane. Like that they were able to do that.
I wouldn't have even thought of that. Like that wouldn't. So it could have just been that Israel missed it because it was just such a crazy thought. Now the other thing is people have said that, like, a lot of the women, female conscripts, a lot of them were tasked with monitoring the border. A lot of women, they go into intelligence positions or into what do you call it? Administrative positions. So you might be a conscript and you're like, hey, sir, you bring this up to your commanding officer. Yeah, these guys are doing hang gliding. What do you know? Right? You're just here for 2 years and I get another one who looks just like you. Go back to your computer. Don't talk to me about this again. It's my best Israeli accent I could do. Right? And they're like, dude, but so who are you gonna go to next, right? Yeah. If my boss told me that, and I'll be like, all right, well, you know what? I did my job. It's on him now. Right. It's on him. If he wants to ignore this intel, all right, I'm going home at the end of the day. Right.
Yeah, I mean it's just hard to wrap your head around when you're someone like me and you're looking at all this stuff like this and trying to understand how people think in that part of the world. And if you haven't been there, it's really, really hard to understand what it must be like, especially living in that part of the world where like you're surrounded by enemies. You're so vulnerable. There are Palestinians who have the key that they had. Have you heard of the term the Nakba? Al-Nakba? So
during the War of Independence, Israel's independence, many Arabs that were on the land, what we call Palestinians today, you'd call, I guess, Palestinians back then too, right? Arabs that lived on the land. Many of them were kicked off their land. Some by the Jews that were taking areas, and some by other Arabs, the Jordanians, the Egyptians, Syrians. They're told, get off the land. You can come back when we've killed all the Jews, right? So these dudes left. And a lot of the ones who ended up in Gaza, they were the ones who never had anything to come back to because they lost their homes during the Nakba. Al-Nakba means catastrophe, the catastrophe.
Oh.
And there are some people who have like that. The key to the house that they owned is like a totem, and it's in like a box, like a picture, a frame, hanging on their wall. If they still have a wall today,
Wow.
it's hanging on a wall, and that's the key that one day we will return. One day we will push the Jews into the sea, and we will return to our home. Like, and this has now been 2 generations since the Nakba. Right, since the catastrophe, and so that's kind of the what we're working with here. And when you do talk to Palestinians who went through that, because I think maybe only a third of the people in Gaza were original residents, like they had farms and stuff like that. And initially, Egypt ran Gaza. Yeah, it was after the 6 Day War that Egypt was like, you know what, you can keep that.
Right.
You know, like that's all you, boo. You deal with that. Life sucks.
What do you think happens with China, Taiwan?
That's a tough one. So I'm not saying that isn't public knowledge. Either China's going to attack Taiwan in October of this year
Before the
with
election?
missiles, before the election, or they're going to wait until 2036. So if it's this year, it'll be a missile attack. It's 2036, 2035, 2036. Could be an invasion. Could be as early as 2037 or 2027, but I don't think so. They need time to train, build up equipment. And I number one, I hope it doesn't happen because there's a lot of people in China. So this is probably going to get played on a loop by propagandists, but Taiwanese are Chinese, right? They have relatives who live in China. And they don't want to go
One
to
China
war.
Ryan over here.
Well, I mean, it's the truth, right? Like, how did Taiwan form? Well, it was the whites, right? It was the people who left mainland China. They went to Taiwan, established their own government there. They let the communists do their thing, right? So they have relatives back in mainland China. There's trade. I think Taiwan is one of China's biggest trading partners, right? And here's the other thing. If Vietnam and Afghanistan had a baby, it would look like Taiwan. If you look at the geography of Taiwan, the entire western half of Taiwan, I think the entire western 2/3 of Taiwan is all mountains. So Taiwan is basically Afghanistan with leaves. And every Taiwanese male knows how to use a gun. Every Taiwanese male is conscripted. And they have quite a few females that volunteer. And one of the most popular things to do in Taiwan now is join these shooting clubs. Really, they're like airsoft clubs. But they have these shooting clubs where guys learn, they do tactics and stuff like that. These are people who do not want to be slaves. And there will be a Taiwanese dude with a rifle behind every blade of grass in every single mountain pass if China tries to invade.
And China doesn't want to blow up their infrastructure, do they?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, ideally, you'd like to capture the chip fabs intact, right? Because that's what Taiwan is, right? Taiwan is the chip factory to the west.
Right.
So you want those chip fabs because I want to say 90% of all the world's chips are made in Taiwan. And you can't run your country without chips.
Right.
Chips. I say the chips today are the steel of World War II. Right. We won World War II based on all the steel that came out of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Right. Well, chips today, they go into the high-tech equipment that allows us to to fight wars, right? That allows us to do the C4ISR, the command control communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance to find where the bad guys are. If I have better C4ISR than you, I know where you're going to be and what you're going to do. I can stop that from happening, right? And we're getting into AI and using AI to figure out where the bad guys are going to be, what they're going to do next, who is doing what and why. Like that's in the intel world. The why that's the big thing. Like if you can figure out the why, it's like, ooh, yeah,
right.
I can tell you who,
yeah,
but why? That's the golden ticket, right? Why is this country doing this? So I mean, they'll probably try to capture the chip plants intact. I don't know. I would imagine the Taiwanese, they may or may not have explosives on those fabs, or will destroy them themselves somehow if they detect an invasion. It's certainly possible. Yeah, I mean, I would imagine they don't have explosives on them now. That is an accountable item.
What do you think the U.S. reaction would be?
Probably send an aircraft carrier along with Great Britain, France, Australia, New Zealand.
Australia?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, some of the best special forces in the world in Australia. The fight isn't necessarily going to be in Taiwan. It's
but wait, isn't
Australia
really dependent on China?
Well, there's trade with China, but Australia is at war with China right now.
Really?
Yeah, cyber and information war. I'm going to a conference in July, I think. It's the 2024 Emergency Medicine Conference, Emergency Services Conference. I forget the darn name of it, but it's at the Gold Coast. I'm going to be speaking there. I'm going to be presenting a paper on how misinformation can be used during a natural disaster. The Hawaii, I remember the Hawaii wildfires.
Oh, yeah.
So that was a lot of the...
Wait, the wildfires. What?
In Hawaii, yeah.
When was this? You're not talking about Maui, right?
Yes, the Maui wildfires. Oh, that was a Chinese, that was a Russian misinformation operation. No, it was not directed energy weapon. Like that kind of thing. Oh God! Like I wanted to get into that. Like I got to talk about the inverse square rule, and because when you for every as you double the distance, the power drops by the inverse of the square. But there was a wildfire, but one of the things that Russia did was they started to push this narrative of people are only getting $700 in payments, and they were, but those are the initial payments. Like FEMA was, you lose your house, FEMA gives you a $700 gift card and says, come back tomorrow, use this $700 gift card to go buy clothes and get a hotel room, and tomorrow we fill out your real paperwork. Right?
Okay.
But brainiacs like Tulsi Gabbard, a woman who I can't even fathom how she still has a security clearance, she goes on Joe Rogan and says, like, oh, well, we're only giving $700 to people in Hawaii. Like, I'm gonna have to fight that, right? A woman you should have on here, Carolyn Orbueno. This woman is amazing. She fights disinformation. She's the real thing. I'm a celebrity. Carolyn Orbueno is the real thing. She has a blog called, or a Substack called Weaponized Spaces, weaponizedSpaces.substack.com. She gets into a lot of how misinformation works and the misinformation actors. And she's a PhD, Dr. Carolyn Orbueno. This is alcoholic Ryan McBeth, right? Compared to Dr. Carolyn Orbueno.
Yeah.
She does a lot of good stuff with that. But how did I get onto that subject?
You said something about Russia using disinformation.
Yeah, Russia used disinformation in Hawaii on wildfires. So I'm actually going to this conference in Australia. Australia is at war with China right now because they put out disinformation to try to discourage people from trusting their government. A couple of days ago, there was a stabbing, like a mass stabbing. Where? In Australia.
Okay.
At the
Bondi Mall.
I
saw that. Yeah,
I did a video about that. And, in China's watching that because they're looking at that going like, okay, when we invade Taiwan, how can we use misinformation and disinformation against the Australian people to convince them not to fight or to say, hey, let's have protests saying like Taiwan has always been Chinese, right? I said TikTok is a weapon. just a couple of days ago, there were people who shut down the San Francisco bridge, shut down SeaTac Airport.
Yeah, I saw that.
You know what else can do that? A missile. Mm-hmm. TikTok is a weapon. That is a weapon that can be deployed like a cruise missile to take out a bridge. The only difference is that
not just TikTok, all social media platforms, YouTube, Twitter, they can all be used as weapons.
They can. The only difference is that I can subpoena the chairman of Google. I can't subpoena the chairman of TikTok.
Well, TikTok is mainly owned by Americans.
I am not familiar with that. So TikTok is owned by a company called ByteDance, which is out of China.
ByteDance only has a very small share of TikTok. Can we let's do it. Let's find this out.
Get to that.
Let's find out who actually owns TikTok. Can you find out the breakup of the shares?
All right, let's see what we got here.
Say who like a breakdown of TikTok ownership.
Who's the owner of TikTok again? Cool.
TikTok. Okay, this is from CNN. So take that for what it's worth. TikTok is ultimately owned through a complex multi-layered corporation structure by ByteDance, a privately owned technology giant. The app is owned by TikTok LLC, limited liability, incorporated in Delaware. Okay, incorporated in Delaware, based in Culver City, California. So can we find out who because there's a board of, who's on the board?
What is this? I know it's on Wikipedia, but
yeah, Douyin is known as
TikTok.
Chinese internet entrepreneur who founded. What percentage?
So Zhang owns 50% of ByteDance's shares.
Ownership.
I can tell you this.
Percentage Chinese.
TikTok.
TikTok has said around 60% of ByteDance is owned by institutional investors, including U.S. giant BlackRock. ByteDance's founders have a 20% stake, but the remainder is held by employees. According to TikTok, incorporated in the Cayman Islands. Well, this says incorporated in the Cayman Islands. Oh, ByteDance is incorporated in the Cayman Islands. Is also lists General Atlantic among its investors.
Okay, so it's just kind of a mix of a whole bunch of people.
Well, a lot of multinational corporations are like that.
What percentage of TikTok is owned by U.S. investors?
Yes.
I'm actually not familiar with that. I didn't know that that was a public company.
Yeah, according to a release published by TikTok last May, around 60% of ByteDance. This is exactly what we just read.
Yeah.
Go down. Who is a majority?
Majority stakeholder.
ByteDance. Okay. See, it's so hard to find it.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you this: any Chinese company, it has to be 51% owned by China. By Chinese investors. So
I understand
parent
that.
Company.
I understand that.
That's actually a huge problem with That's actually a huge problem with investment in China, because once you agree to manufacture things or sell things in China, you have to partner with a Chinese company. And they have to get 51%, and they steal all your IP.
Right.
And that's gone.
Right. So my understanding is, and Steve, I don't know what else you can find on here. You're going to probably have to dig. But my understanding was that the majority of TikTok was owned by U.S. shareholders, and it's a U.S.-based company, and there
is a U.S.-based version of TikTok. In China, it's Douyin, but it's owned by ByteDance. Yeah.
Right.
So there is a ByteDance America. That when we talk about banning TikTok, that doesn't necessarily mean banning TikTok. It means that TikTok has to be sold to someone in the U.S. who can be subpoenaed in front of Congress.
Right.
That's kind of the issue.
And that is our version of TikTok, right? It is owned by the U.S. and the owner can be subpoenaed. And it's not like there's like this idea that our TikTok is just China controlled, but that's not the case.
China's almost definitely getting all the data. Like without a doubt, they have access to the data, or they're setting orders down. I mean, if I can tell you this, the scary part about something like TikTok is that if China does invade Taiwan, they could just flip a switch and the next day say, "Hey, listen, you're not allowed to have any pro-Taiwan videos on American TikTok anymore." Now, maybe some people will say, like, "Oh no, I'm not gonna allow that to happen," right? But look, when your job's on the line, you got kids you got to put through college. What are you gonna say? What are you gonna do, right? That's kind of the scary part for me, that we've allowed a weapon system to infiltrate this country.